Planet Reddit, today's story is...
My cousin locked my 8-year-old son in a car at 32 degrees Celsius as a punishment and mocked him when he almost died. Her smile disappeared when the police arrived. I never thought that my cousin Ruth, age 34, would risk the life of my little boy and that, when confronted, she would behave as if nothing serious had happened. Ruth's son celebrated his confirmation last weekend. The ceremony went smoothly. It was long and, to be honest, a little tedious, but nothing out of the ordinary. The real problem began during the reception, which was held at the local country club. While we adults chatted and socialized inside, the children played outside in an area designated for them. I checked on Alex several times during the event, and everything seemed to be in order. There were other adults supervising, so I wasn't worried about him. At no time did I notice anything strange or think that Ruth would take him elsewhere. That's why I was so surprised when Ruth discreetly pulled me aside and informed me that Alex had been behaving disrespectfully, talking back and being rude to the event staff. He had never misbehaved at previous family gatherings, and I found it hard to believe that he had suddenly started disrespecting adults. Before I could even ask what exactly had happened, she waved me off. She told me not to worry, that she had already handled the situation. I immediately asked her where Alex was. Her reply was accompanied by a smirk. "Oh, he's just taking a little break in the car for a moment." At first I didn't understand what she was implying. Then I reacted and understood what she had done. She had locked my son in a car. I didn't stop to argue. I didn't stop to question her motives. I just ran. I left the building in a hurry, my heart beating so hard I could hear it echoing in my ears. The summer heat was overwhelming. As soon as I spotted my car in the parking lot, I feared the worst. The doors were locked, and inside, Alex was crying inconsolably, drenched in sweat, his face red, his little hands desperately pounding on the window, gasping for fresh air. Panic set in. I grabbed the handles and pulled with all my might, but the doors wouldn't give. My fingers were shaking so much that I could barely hold the phone to call 911. That's when Eric caught up with me. Seeing Alex trapped inside, he didn't hesitate for a second. He took a rock and broke the window of the passenger seat. The glass shattered, but at that moment nothing mattered except getting my son out, because it wasn't even our car. I rushed over and pulled Alex out. His skin was burning to the touch. He'd been locked in there for who knows how long in the suffocating heat. By then, a crowd had formed around us. The country club staff quickly arrived. Someone had called the paramedics. And finally, Ruth appeared. She looked annoyed, not guilty, not worried, just annoyed that people were making a scene. And as if she hadn't caused enough damage, she added something else to make the situation worse. Come on, he was only there a few minutes. Maybe now he'll learn not to be so spoiled. I had never felt so angry in my entire life. My hands were shaking, so much that I had to hold on to Eric's arm to keep from lunging at her. Eric was tense, as if ready to confront someone. He turned to Ruth and asked her if she had completely lost her mind. He accused her of potentially killing Alex. She had the audacity to reply, "It wasn't that hot, I left the window open a little," which was completely untrue. Eric seemed on the verge of losing control. The paramedics arrived and confirmed that Alex was suffering from heat exhaustion and dehydration. They immediately started to give him fluids and monitor his vital signs. They explained that if we had found him later, the consequences could have been much more serious. And yet Ruth remained unmoved. She said, "They're so over the top, my children would have been perfectly fine." I suggested we could try her in one of the cars. Maybe that would test her resilience. She was already so incensed that we decided to call the police. Ruth's confidence finally evaporated. Her husband came running, trying to defuse the situation. He was equally horrible, claiming that it had only been a parenting decision and that we were ruining a family event for a simple punishment. Eric told them they were sick if they considered locking a child in a hot car an acceptable form of discipline. Before the situation completely spiraled out of control, the police arrived. The officers took statements from us and from several witnesses. And when they heard Ruth admit that she had locked Alex in the car as punishment, the officers' expressions hardened. She was arrested on the spot. Ruth's husband started yelling at the officers, insisting that it was ridiculous and that we were at his son's confirmation. One of the officers took Eric aside and strongly recommended that we press charges for endangering a minor. And that is exactly what we will do. Now, Ruth's husband is trying to defend her, saying that I am destroying the family. My aunt and Ruth's sisters are calling me a terrible person for involving the authorities. I don't care at all. Ruth locked my son in a car with a temperature of 32 degrees. He deserves all the consequences that await him. Edit. First of all, I want to thank you for all the support and outrage expressed on Alex's behalf. I've noticed that some people have asked about certain aspects of what happened, so I want to clarify them here. 1. How did Ruth gain access to my car? Some people were confused about how Ruth managed to lock Alex in our car. I should have explained better. It wasn't our vehicle. It was Ruth's car, so she had her own keys to do it. For that reason, I didn't mind Eric breaking her window either. 2. Why didn't Alex open the door from the inside? Many asked why Alex didn't just open the door. The truth is that he tried. Ruth activated the child lock on the back doors before putting him in the car. Alex was completely trapped. The front doors were also locked, and he was too scared to think clearly. 3. How long was he in the car? We don't have an exact time, but based on the last time I saw Alex playing and the time we found him, it was between 15 and 20 minutes. It may not seem like a long time, but in a car without air conditioning, with an outside temperature above 30 degrees, it was enough for him to start to overheat severely. The paramedics explained to us that, had more time passed, it could have been much worse. Possibly heat stroke. 4. Why didn't anyone else help? This is what angers me the most. There were people outside, but no one realized what was happening. The parking lot was separated from the event area, and because Ruth left the window barely open, Alex's screams were not audible enough. It wasn't until Eric and I ran out, screaming, that people turned their attention in that direction. 5. Does this really constitute an arrestable offense? Absolutely. The police did not hesitate to arrest Ruth after hearing what she did. She admitted to the officers that she locked Alex in the car as punishment. She never denied it. Due to the extreme heat, the length of the confinement, and Alex's medical condition, it was classified as endangering a minor. That is why she was arrested immediately. 6. Why is the family defending her? This is the hardest thing to explain. My family has always treated Ruth in a special way. That's what many people identified in the comments as the Golden Girl. Even after endangering my son, there were people who protected her. At this point, I am not interested in what the rest of the family has to say. Ruth did not make a simple mistake. She made a deliberate decision that could have cost my son his life. I hope this clears up any outstanding questions. At the end of the day, nothing justifies Ruth's actions. Neither family loyalty nor excuses about discipline. She put my son's life at risk, and now she will face the consequences. I'm going to press charges, and I'm not backing down, no matter how much my family begs me. Update 1. She spent the night in prison. She was released on bail today, and a court date has already been set for the charges of endangering a minor. The consequences of her actions were immediate, but not in the way I expected. I naively thought that, after being arrested, she would at least show some remorse. That she would understand how close she came to causing serious harm to a child and feel even the slightest amount of guilt. But instead, she dug in her heels even more firmly. Her family went into full defense mode as soon as she was released on bail. Her husband started calling all the relatives, insisting that everything had been hugely exaggerated and that I was simply an overprotective mother. He never apologized for his wife's actions, and instead suggested that I was doing this because I lacked the ability to apply firm discipline to a child, something he said I lacked. My aunt wants me to drop the charges, arguing that although she may have made a small mistake, you shouldn't destroy her life over it. A mistake? That's how they're describing what happened. Locking my son in a car at 32 degrees, leaving him until he was red, crying and dehydrated, was not a mistake. It was child abuse. I will not allow myself to be manipulated into thinking otherwise. Initially, I ignored her calls and messages because, regardless of what they do, I will stand by my charges. But Ruth took to social media. She did not relate the true facts, but a version in which she was being unjustly punished for practically nothing. She claimed that I had only disciplined my son without specifying the exact method, and that I was making up stories to ruin his life. Something I was no longer going to tolerate. A week after the incident, another family gathering was scheduled, the birthday of one of my youngest cousins. I had no intention of attending, but when I found out that Ruth and her husband would be present, promoting their distorted version of events, I made a decision. If they wanted to manipulate the narrative, I would end it for good. Eric had doubts about whether I should attend, but he knew me well enough to understand that I needed to. Not just for myself, but for Alex. Because one day he would hear different versions of what happened, and I wanted to make sure that the truth was clear and convincing. When I arrived, I could feel the tension in the air immediately. Some of the relatives looked at me uncomfortably, not knowing what position to take. Others ignored me completely, which clearly indicated that they supported Ruth. And Ruth, sitting with her usual smile in a corner, seemed completely calm. She had convinced people with her deception, so she thought she had already won. But I gathered everyone together and told them we needed to talk and related the true version of events. There were family members who were present that day, but they didn't get to the parking lot until after Alex had been rescued. While other family members didn't attend for various reasons, so they thought I had just yelled at her and that's why we were arguing. But when I explained what really happened, there was no doubt left and loyalties began to shift. More precisely, the people who supported Ruth began to reconsider their position. Some turned pale, realizing that they had been supporting the wrong position. But I didn't stop there. I took out the medical report, the official document that detailed Alex's condition in great detail, confirming dehydration, elevated body temperature, and emotional distress. I read it out loud, without omitting any details. Ruth left the room in a rage. After that night, the story changed completely. Ruth and her husband stopped presenting themselves as victims because they could no longer sustain their lie. The relatives who had initially supported her remained silent, either out of shame or because they finally understood the gravity of what had happened. But most importantly, no one believed Ruth's falsehoods anymore. And this is not over, because I have already decided that I am going to sue her in addition to the criminal charges she is already facing. Ruth thinks she can pretend to be the victim. Let her prove it in court and see how she gets on. There she won't be able to tell her side of the story while omitting crucial details. It will be really interesting to see her try to keep her smirk in that environment. Update 2. From the moment I had Ruth arrested, I knew she would take this matter to its logical conclusion, no matter how many family members tried to intervene or minimize what had happened. Ruth's trial was a complete disaster for her. She tried to present herself as a victim. She cried in court, claiming that she never wanted to hurt Alex, that she was just trying to teach him a lesson, that she thought the window was open enough, and that she only planned to leave him there for a brief moment until he calmed down. But it was her own statements that damaged her case. Witnesses confirmed that no window was open, and that she continued to show indifference to her actions even after the gravity of the situation became clear. Even then, she continued to claim that maybe now he would learn not to be so spoiled. Her entire defense crumbled. She was found guilty of endangering a minor. She did not receive a prison sentence, but was given probation, mandatory parenting classes, and most significantly, a restraining order. She was officially prohibited from any contact with Alex. That should have been the end of it, if Alex wasn't my son. I wasn't finished. The criminal case was one part, but I wanted real consequences that would truly affect him. Alex had nightmares for weeks. He refused to go anywhere without my presence or that of my husband. He had recurring dreams where he was locked in dark spaces with no possibility of escape. So I took Ruth and her husband to the civil courts. I sued them for emotional distress, medical expenses, and punitive damages. Her husband, the same one who had been ranting on social media about how I was destroying Ruth's life, suddenly changed his attitude. He begged me to reach an agreement, suggesting that we could agree on financial compensation and call it a day. I refused outright. I wanted the case to go to trial. I wanted every detail of Ruth's actions to be laid before the judge. And in the end, I was victorious. It is not so much the monetary amount, which exceeds $50,000, but the precedent that this lawsuit sets. If you ever consider committing another similar indiscretion, whether with Alex or any other child, you will need to think carefully. Update 3. Several months have passed since Ruth was convicted of endangering a minor, and the full extent of her actions has been revealed. I had hoped that, After all that had happened, she would disappear from the radar and reflect on her actions. Unfortunately, that has not happened. I don't believe she feels remorse, even as her life continues to deteriorate. Perhaps after so much adversity, one can realize that something is being done incorrectly, which is why karma seems to take its toll. But in Ruth's case, it is the universe that is at fault, not her. The most heartbreaking consequence of Ruth's behavior was not the loss of her reputation, or even that of her marriage, but the devastating effect her actions had on her own son, Seth. 4 weeks after the incident, Seth became withdrawn. His father, now Ruth's ex-husband, has said that he began to have nightmares about what happened to Alex, and even worse, he began to fear that his mother might subject him to a similar treatment. Why? You see, Seth was there that day. He witnessed everything with his own eyes. He saw Alex crying desperately, struggling to breathe, and he also saw his mother acting with total indifference. For the mind of a child like Seth, his mother showing such cruelty is incomprehensible. He began to ask disturbing questions. Why did Mom do that? And, would she ever lock me in a car if I misbehave? I am convinced that Ruth tried to minimize the situation by telling Seth that he is not like Alex and that he would never deserve such a punishment. In the end, not only Alex was emotionally traumatized, but also Ruth's own son, the child she claimed to love deeply. Seth could not escape the trauma and began to actively reject her, avoiding her contact and walking away every time she tried to comfort him. When Ruth's ex-husband observed how he reacted to his mother, it was the decisive point. Yes, the same person who initially thought that his wife was just teaching a lesson and nothing more serious, but when it came to his own son, he was no longer so sure. Especially when he witnessed the consequences of that kind of discipline, even though it had not been applied directly to Seth. He filed a lawsuit seeking full custody of Seth, and to Ruth's dismay, he won the case. Indeed, Ruth tried to alter the narrative, claiming that her husband was the one who abused Seth, and that was why she wanted a divorce. But the vast majority of us know how to distinguish between truth and lies. We have spent time with Seth, and he has given his own version of events. Ruth, despite all her claims to be an exemplary mother, which is patently untrue, is now only allowed to see her son under professional supervision. And Seth categorically refuses to even consider that possibility. The divorce came through shortly afterwards, with her ex-husband cutting all contact with her. Nobody in her social circle wanted to have anything to do with Ruth, and she eventually moved in with Seth to start a new life somewhere else. I hope that as her ex-husband distances himself from Ruth, he will leave behind any toxicity he has absorbed from her. I don't know for sure, but at least he seems to have woken up to reality. I trust it to be a positive thing, at least for Seth's well-being. And Ruth is completely alone. Not only is she unemployed and friendless, but she is also totally alienated from most of the family. Nobody wants to have anything to do with her, and the few who still speak to her are probably just waiting for the next scandal. I thought I was finally done with her. I really believed it. But a few weeks ago, Ruth turned up unexpectedly at my door. I was outside with Alex when I saw her car pull up. I stood my ground and called the police immediately before demanding that she leave. Ruth got out of her car, furious, looking like she hadn't slept for days. And she immediately started shouting, hurling all kinds of insults at me. "You ruined my life," she yelled. "You turned my son against me." She had the nerve to accuse me of being responsible for the loss of her marriage and her family. Alex, who was standing next to me, instinctively hid behind me and began to tremble. I asked him to go inside the house and stay there, but he was equally affected by the reappearance of his aunt. That was the moment when I completely lost my patience. I took a step forward and said firmly, "You brought this on yourself, Ruth. Now leave my property immediately, because if you stay here for a second longer, the police on their way here could arrest you again." Her expression changed from anger to sheer disbelief, as if she couldn't believe that I was no longer afraid of her and that I was willing to do whatever it took to protect my son. She expressed her disbelief at my call to the police, although I had already done so, but I suggested that she stay a little longer to check it out for herself. She left in a rage, but not before shouting threateningly, "This isn't over." But yes, it was indeed over, because from the moment she violated the restraining order, she sealed her fate for good. To begin with, Ruth finds herself without a job, without friends and without contact with most of her family. Her reputation is completely destroyed, and no one defends her anymore. Every time her name comes up at a family gathering, people change the subject or make some unfavorable comment about her. It is as if she has become a true social outcast. Her ex-husband moved in with Seth, obtaining full custody, because the child is basically afraid of his own mother. The situation is extremely unfavorable for her. And as if that were not enough, she was arrested again for violating the restraining order. This game she thinks she is playing with me is definitely over. Not only has she lost, but she has also been completely humiliated. It is time for her to face the reality around her. It has been traumatic for Alex to see his aunt again, but we are confident that he will not see her for a long time, which will contribute to his recovery. He is receiving professional help for those who ask about it. We hope it is only a matter of time before Alex shows significant improvement. But if that improvement requires Ruth to stay far away, and not of her own free will, then as a mother I will make sure that it happens. Update 4. My duty as a mother is to protect my child, and that is exactly what I have done by enforcing the restraining order, even if it intensifies a situation we would have preferred to avoid. We filed a new complaint against Ruth, and due to her noncompliance, she will serve approximately 3 months in prison. We consulted with a lawyer to advise us on the complaint, with the intention of including the threat and other elements so that Ruth would receive a more severe or prolonged sentence. However, the judge ruled that, as this was a first offense and there had been no physical aggression against Alex, it did not warrant more than 3 months imprisonment. He even mentioned that, in some similar cases, first offenses are often punished only with a fine. I wonder then what the real use of a restraining order is. We have 3 months to prepare ourselves before her release, because we are aware that the prison experience will not appease Ruth, and there is a possibility that she will exhibit even more violent behavior. If she has shown instability during these months, I don't want to imagine the impact that confinement could have on her mental state. Our lawyer has put us in touch with a specialist in cases of family violence to identify the best strategy to mitigate any potential risk that this woman may represent. Honestly, I feel afraid at this stage because I don't know what Ruth might be capable of in the future, and the absence of a truly effective judicial system only increases my uncertainty. In spite of everything, I stand firm in my decision. Eric and I will protect Alex at any cost, no matter how complicated or costly it may be. Update 5. These months of preparation have proven unnecessary, but at least they have provided me with a certain peace of mind in feeling that we had everything under control. We have implemented measures to ensure that Ruth could not cause us harm, although I will not specify which ones, in case she ever reads this account. Fortunately, it has not been necessary to put them into practice because Ruth has decided to move away. I wouldn't say to the opposite end of the country, but almost as far as that. It is a sad and regrettable outcome, but in Ruth's case it represents what is fair and necessary for the well-being of other people. However, in this specific situation, her departure has been the most beneficial thing for our peace of mind. She is still subject to the restraining order, she can hardly see her son, and the vast majority of the family has cut off all relations with her. In fact, at this point I would say that the whole family has done so, because even her own mother has said that this is the best decision Ruth could have made. As for Alex, these months without news from Ruth have benefited him enormously. And when we informed him that she had left, probably for good, I could see that his relief was even deeper. I sincerely hope that this is the final chapter of my story, and that I will not have to return to report that Ruth has returned to the city. However, we have preventive measures in place for her, and violating another restraining order should carry more severe consequences than the first time.